This is a virtual reading of Conspirators, To Each His Own Agenda by Matt Gupta.
Author notes. This work is a piece of fiction, yet it draws heavily upon historical sources and traditions. It is not intended as a commentary on specific historical events. Rather, it presents a reimagining of conflicts, figures, and outcomes as they might plausibly have unfolded, shaped by the author's interpretation of the characters and cultures involved. The following notes outline the principal historical inspirations behind the characters, factions, and events depicted in this work, offering additional context for readers interested in the foundations from which the narrative was developed. One of the most significant historical inspirations for the narrative is the Battle of Adrianople, fought between Roman and Gothic forces. While the engagement itself unfolds in the novel in a manner broadly consistent with historical accounts, its consequences diverge sharply from recorded history. For narrative purposes, the aftermath of Adrianople has been deliberately reshaped by combining it with the political collapse that followed the death of Emperor Nero some 3 centuries earlier, a period during which Rome was plunged into civil war and saw 4 emperors rise and fall within the span of a single year. This period introduces Vespasian into the narrative. In keeping with historical precedent, his rule does not give rise to a lasting dynasty. Instead, it marks the beginning of an era dominated by short-lived autocratic warlords whose authority rests on force rather than lineage. The cumulative effect of this instability is the erosion of Rome's reliance on royal bloodlines as a foundation of legitimacy. Although this era spans a considerable length of time, it is treated in broad strokes. The rapid turnover of rulers and the absence of enduring institutions render individual legacies transient, and few figures of this period leave a meaningful or lasting impact upon the empire as a whole. The Battle of the Golden King marks a decisive turning point in the narrative. In terms of military ambition and capability, the Golden King is deliberately modeled on Hannibal, inflicting some of the most severe defeats suffered by Rome in centuries. His eventual defeat draws direct inspiration from Scipio Africanus's strategy at the Battle of Zama. The Golden King's most destructive vanguard formations are neutralized through controlled column maneuvers, after which the main body is enveloped and destroyed by a coordinated, overwhelming counterattack. The narrative is presented through Gilon's perspective in order to explore the class and cultural divisions that characterize societies analogous to those of the Roman and Greek worlds. His position within the social hierarchy allows these tensions to be observed directly, without the mediation of elite or imperial viewpoints. Gilon is a wholly fictional creation and is not intended to represent any specific historical figure, serving instead as a composite lens through which these social dynamics can be examined. General Feltor is primarily inspired by Julius Caesar, both in his public presence and in his capacity as a commander. His bearing and reputation are intentionally evocative of Caesar, as he is commonly represented in historical tradition and popular culture, reinforcing his role as a charismatic and polarizing figure. Certain aspects of Feltor's character are wholly fictional. His physical injury, while loosely echoing Caesar's historical ailments, is not intended as a direct analogue. Instead, it exists to serve the narrative, particularly in shaping his relationship with Callisto and the vulnerabilities that emerge from it. Falthor's conduct on the battlefield draws from a composite of historical commanders, combining the adaptability of Caesar, the operational discipline of Scipio Africanus, the defensive pragmatism of Aetius, and the inspirational leadership associated with Leonidas. His political acumen, however, is derived almost entirely from Caesar's ability to mobilize public sentiment and redirect loyalty away from established authority. Other historical figures such as Sulla, Marius, and Aurelian were considered but ultimately set aside, as their paths to power, whether through institutional legitimacy or popular acceptance, did not align with the specific narrative pressures and oppositional dynamics required by the story. Alistair is defined primarily through his manner of warfare rather than through ideological or political doctrine. His unwavering, often reckless approach to battle is deliberately evocative of mythic figures such as Achilles and of other empowered warriors whose dominance on the field borders on the legendary. Politically, Alistair is not drawn from a single historical model. Instead, his outlook reflects the pragmatic and frequently cynical attitudes common to populist leaders operating under sustained military pressure. His approach balances the demands of large-scale military mobilization with the necessity of maintaining internal order and public support. In the later stages of his life, Alistair's trajectory is informed by a range of charismatic leaders who rose to prominence during periods of national weakness. Figures such as Napoleon Bonaparte, William the Conqueror, and Marcus Furius Camillus, alongside other empire builders, all contribute to the composite influence shaping his eventual role within the narrative. Turgon is designed as a deliberate analogue to Mark Antony in relation to Felthor's Caesar. His character draws most heavily from Antony's early career, during the campaigns in Gaul and the civil war against Pompey, rather than from his later political role opposing Octavian. This interpretation rests on the view that Antony's decline was inseparable from the loss of his defining alliance with Caesar. Preserving this dynamic is central to Turgon's role within the narrative. Accordingly, Turgon commands cavalry, forming the yin to Felthor's yang. Where Felthor dominates through disciplined infantry, Turgon provides mobility and shock, creating a relationship of mutual reliance that reinforces both their strategic partnership and personal loyalty. Berenice was among the most compelling characters to craft. She is a deliberate synthesis of historical warrior queens, cultural ideals, and narrative archetypes drawn from myth and pop culture. Few historical examples fully encompass her combination of martial excellence and striking presence, making her largely a fictional creation. Her beauty and allure coexist with, but never define, her authority. In contrast to many figures constrained by male-dominated worlds, Berenice's power derives from her military and strategic capabilities, ensuring that her leadership rests on merit and strength, rather than persuasion through appearance alone. Ignatius is a character deliberately crafted to serve as the primary obstacle to the protagonist's goals. He is inspired largely by the late Roman power broker Ricimer, whose ambition and opportunism contributed significantly to the instability of Rome. Unlike figures such as Sulla or other historically notorious leaders, Ignatius is designed not as a dictator, but as a personification of treachery and obstruction. His origin is intentionally left vague. This lack of personal backstory reinforces his role as an irredeemable force within the narrative, ensuring that audiences focus on his actions rather than sympathizing with him. While a basic origin narrative exists, it is intended to chart historical and political events rather than to explore Ignatius's internal character development. Writing The Lord Warden and The Fountain Hoplites was particularly enjoyable. Both draw inspiration from extensive experience with video games and tabletop war games, while The Lord Warden is an entirely original creation. Their formidable capabilities, particularly in comparison with Roman legionaries, are deliberate. When evaluating the peak performance of classical Greek hoplites against the lesser-trained forces of later Roman legions, the relative scale of effectiveness aligns with the narrative. This design ensures that the fountain hoplites remain a credible and awe-inspiring force within the story. Richard of Horseland and Tiberius represent contrasting archetypes within the narrative. Richard embodies the complexities of leadership, combining the roles of soldier, politician, and occasionally unruly figure. His development draws heavily upon the historical Richard the Lionheart, with the culture and society of Horseland crafted in parallel to reflect the values, military structure, and political context of his era. Tiberius serves as a stabilizing counterpart to Richard, providing wisdom and counsel where Richard's impulses may lean toward the more impulsive or primitive. He is not directly modeled on any specific historical figure, but reflects the qualities associated with an ideal Norman prince of the period. Together, the two characters illustrate the balance between action and prudence, leadership and guidance within the story. The decision to portray Dacia as the primary Roman adversaries, rather than groups such as the Gauls or Iberians, is inspired by the campaigns of Emperor Trajan. The historical conflict provides a compelling framework for narrative tension. While the story extends beyond historical outcomes, Dacia is depicted mounting a revolt that poses a serious threat to Rome before ultimately being crushed. The scenario serves as an effective foundation for the narrative. The subsequent defeat and enslavement of the Dacians offers a dramatic backdrop for exploring themes of resistance, consequence, and the enduring impact of conquest. The prince's campaign against the orcs in the first Exitum is inspired by a series of events originally enacted in a strategy wargame. When adapting these events for the narrative, historical parallels were sought to provide additional depth and plausibility. The resulting storyline draws upon the campaigns of Belisarius of the Byzantine Empire, particularly his reconquest of Rome. The similarity of circumstances, such as the overwhelming odds faced by a determined commander, made this historical analogue an ideal framework for structuring the narrative and enhancing its tension. The Battle of Gladium is not drawn from a single historical account, but is informed by a thorough understanding of Hellenic naval warfare and extensive simulations of large-scale naval engagements. The victory depicted is intentionally Pyrrhic, reflecting the devastating toll that such battles would have exacted even on a winning force. The pirates encountered in this engagement are inspired by a range of historical maritime cultures, with particular reference to the Illyrian pirates active during the time of Caesar. Their tactics and organization are adapted to fit the narrative, providing a credible and challenging adversary for the protagonists. Tathar was initially conceived as a fictional Pompey, intended to serve as a foil to a Caesar-like Phaeltor. Early drafts explored an exaggerated, debaucherous version of this historical figure. But as the narrative evolved, many aspects of Tathar's story were streamlined to fit the emerging plot. For instance, Phaelthor's nephew in the Fountain Court was originally envisioned as Tathar's son, reflecting the historical connection, but this relationship was removed to better align with the fictional dynamics of the story. These adjustments ensure that Tathar's presence supports the narrative while retaining the essence of his historical inspiration. Mistnir is inspired primarily by the Athenian general Themistocles, both in terms of political acumen and naval command. His willingness to act independently, prioritizing his own strategic interpretation, even at great personal risk, mirrors Themistocles' decision to confront the Persians at Salamis rather than defend Athens. This approach informs Mistnir's choices following the pirate campaign. While his actions achieve military success, they carry the potential to vilify him in the eyes of his people, reflecting the tension between personal initiative and public perception that characterized Themistocles' career. Aquila is not modeled on any specific historical figure, but draws heavily on the legendary narrative of King Arthur. His name, Aquila, eagle in Latin, evokes Rome itself, while Artorius references Arthur, reinforcing his symbolic claim to Rome's throne. The sword he carries is distinct from Excalibur. It represents the legendary sword in the stone that he withdrew, rather than the magical weapon bestowed by the Lady of the Lake. Aquila's past is deliberately obscured, reinforcing a sense of destiny and elevating his presence as a figure acting at the behest of an immortal god. This narrative choice maintains an aura of mystery and emphasizes his mythic role within the story. The elven goddess Hypatia is modeled primarily on Aphrodite. While Athens and Corinthos are both represented as major Italian mainland cities in the narrative, Corinthos serves as the primary elven stronghold, particularly after the destruction of Syracuse during the pirate invasion. Assigning Hypatia as the patron deity of Corinthos rather than Athens aligns with the narrative geography and underscores her thematic role. This choice also reflects a deliberate emphasis on Aphrodite's qualities, rather than those associated with Athena or Artemis, the historical patrons of these cities. The invasion of the harbour city is entirely fictional and strategically improbable. Historical and simulated analyses suggest that a vanguard landing ahead of a main force on a fortified coast almost invariably leads to disaster, unless deliberately used as bait for a larger trap. In the narrative, this scenario is implemented as a deliberate exception to these principles, prioritizing dramatic tension and story progression over strict adherence to military plausibility. The political system depicted in this book does not correspond directly to any historical model from Rome or Greece. It is a deliberately constructed framework designed to accommodate the narrative's key figures. Within this system, Ignatius functions as dictator, Decimus represents house stewards, and the two consuls, who are represented by characters as needed. Seaward represents through Alistair, and Horseland through Aquila. These positions operate alongside a Senate-like assembly of elected officials, forming the kingdom's governing body and providing both political structure and narrative flexibility. Aquila occupies a primarily diplomatic role, as Horseland functions as an ally rather than a vassal of Rome, unlike Seaward. The principality has a more complex governance structure, with authority divided between the prince, a council of annually appointed generals, an assembly of 500 statesmen, and additional daily assemblies of the populace. For narrative clarity, the system is designed so that holding office in one city precludes holding office in another, with the exception of the prince. This structure is only lightly referenced in the story to avoid overcomplicating the text, but it establishes a coherent framework for political interactions within the principality. Callisto is a character who navigates the constraints of a male-dominated society while pursuing political influence and ambition. Unlike Berenice, she operates within existing structures, using her position and acumen to achieve her goals, rather than overtly challenging societal norms. Her character draws inspiration from historical figures such as Cleopatra and Zenobia, but she is envisioned more as a pragmatic businesswoman than as a queen or empress seeking power for its own sake. Agrippina, the sister and consort of Caligula, provides a reference point for the extremes of ambition, illustrating the lengths Callisto might go to maintain authority. Unlike Agrippina, however, Callisto's actions are guided by a coherent value system, blending ambition with strategic restraint. While historical events and figures inform many aspects of this book, the work remains a fictional narrative. Certain events have been altered, condensed, or interpreted deliberately to serve the story and its characters. I hope this appendix has enhanced your understanding of the inspirations behind the characters, battles, and political structures presented. Thank you for reading and supporting this saga. Conspirators is part of a larger series, with additional volumes forthcoming.